If I was to ask you to name an organic molecule, most of you would say benzene. That's because it's synonymous with organic chemistry. The six carbon ring of benzene is a very common structure, being a part of pharmaceuticals, dyes, and many organic chemicals. You most likely won't think of benzene's less known cousin, benzyne. The structure looks cursed, three bonds in a ring, and it doesn't like to exist, making it very reactive. Today we'll use the reactivity in arguably one of the most important and useful reaction mechanisms to make tryptycene, a unique organic molecule that resembles a paddle wheel. So let's head to the fume hood and begin our work. To kick off our synthesis, we need N-butyl nitrite. The problem is it decomposes quickly. Therefore, a freshly prepared batch is needed. First, we grab a 500 milliliter 3-neck round bottom flask and set it up with a mechanical stirrer and a thermometer. Next, we add 64 grams of sodium nitrite, along with 250 milliliters of water, and start stirring to help it dissolve completely. After which, we place the flask into an ice salt bath to cool the mixture down to about 0 degrees Celsius. The bath is pretty effective, even capable of reaching temperatures below zero. We keep the solution stirred gently as it cools. This low temperature is super important because during the reaction it lets sodium nitrite generate nitrous acid, while keeping reactive intermediates under control. While our reaction mixture chills out, we can prepare the other solution needed for the reaction. We mix together 17 milliliters of water and 42 grams of concentrated sulfuric acid. Then add 76 milliliters of N-butyl alcohol. We then pop this mixture into an ice bath for a few minutes until it chills down to around 0 degrees Celsius. Once both the sodium nitrite solution and this acid alcohol blend are nice and cool, it's time to bring them together. We then transfer the alcohol mixture into a separatory funnel, and then very slowly add it to the nitrite solution, aiming to keep the overall temperature steady at around 0 to 1 degrees Celsius. Adding slowly is the key here. As soon as the sulfuric acid meets the sodium nitrite solution, nitrous acid forms. If this addition is rushed, you risk creating nitrogen oxides or triggering unwanted side reactions. Throughout this process, the mechanical stirrer works to keep everything evenly mixed, preventing any hot spots. This gradual addition can take anywhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending on the rate of addition needed to keep it in the proper temperature range. Even when you add it slowly and keep things cool, you might still notice a little nitrogen dioxide forming, the reddish-brown gas often nicknamed Red Death because of its toxic nature. In this reaction, sulfuric acid protonates sodium nitrite to form nitrous acid, which then reacts with N-butyl alcohol at low temperatures, yielding N-butyl nitrite, an ester of nitrous acid. Because nitrous acid is unstable and prone to decomposition, the reaction mixture must be kept near zero to control the rate and minimize any side reactions that could occur. Once we've finished adding the alcohol solution, we stop stirring and let the reaction mixture sit in the ice salt bath. This cooling period helps the mixture settle into two layers: an upper organic layer, hopefully containing our butyl nitrite, and a lower aqueous layer, filled with extra water, sodium sulfate byproducts, and any other water-soluble compounds. Now carefully decant the liquid to separate out any undissolved sodium sulfate, transferring the liquid to a separatory funnel. In the funnel, we now gently remove the lower aqueous layer, leaving behind the organic phase with the crude butyl nitrite solution. Now let's clear out any lingering acid or base impurities. We do this by washing the organic layer twice with about 50 milliliters of a special washing solution. This solution is prepared by dissolving 2 grams of sodium bicarbonate and 25 grams of sodium chloride in 100 milliliters of water. The sodium bicarbonate neutralizes any leftover acid, while the sodium chloride boosts the ionic strength, helping your organic products separate nicely from water. Once the washes are done, transfer your butyl nitrite to a storage bottle. After purification, I ended up with about 53.25 grams of butyl nitrite, about 62% of the theoretical yield based on the starting materials. We can estimate the theoretical yield either by comparing a smaller and larger runs, or by calculating how much nitrous acid can form to esterify the N-butyl alcohol. For example, on a larger scale reaction I based my reaction from, using 457 milliliters of reactants instead of my 76 milliliters, you can typically get around 420 to 440 grams, which is roughly 81 to 85% of the theoretical amount. Scaling down to 76 milliliters, the theoretical yield is about 86 grams. So my 53.25 grams comes out to roughly 62%. These differences can easily be chalked up to minor variations in temperature control, mixing efficiency, and different side reactions occurring, or even the fact that my nitrite was a bit old. Next, I added 4 grams of anhydrous sodium sulfate to soak up any water that might be present. This is a crucial step because even trace water can mess up further reactions or shorten storage life of the chemical. Alkyl nitrites can decompose slowly over time, especially when they're exposed to heat or direct sunlight, so proper storage is crucial. I kept the butyl nitrite in a chem fridge until it was needed for the next reaction. If you're aiming for even higher purity, you can always distill the product under reduced pressure, though I didn't find it necessary for this reaction. To confirm the synthesis worked as expected, I ran an NMR. The peaks lined up perfectly with the expected pattern, verifying the formation of N-butyl nitrite. So we can now start the next reaction. At this point, I ran into a dangerous problem. To explain, let's take a quick step aside to talk about peroxides, fascinating yet potentially hazardous compounds. Peroxides contain an oxygen-oxygen single bond, which makes them chemically unstable and prone to decomposition. You might be familiar with hydrogen peroxide, which breaks down quite easily. This is in stark contrast to bonds like a nitrogen-nitrogen triple bond in molecular hydrogen, which is incredibly stable and strong. One common issue arises with ethers. Over time, they can form peroxides, although many ethers include inhibitors to prevent this. Those inhibitors can eventually break down or might not be added, leading to the buildup of dangerous peroxide crystals given enough time. While I was looking for a solvent I wanted to use in the Triptycene synthesis, bis-2-methoxyl ethyl ether, I noticed something alarming. Crystals had formed at the bottom of the bottle. This can be either of two things: crystal drying reagents such as sodium sulfite or peroxide crystals. Since peroxide crystals are highly reactive and can even detonate with a slight shock or movement, this was a serious red flag. An example of this explosive nature is found in Kuhl's favorite compound, triacetone triperoxide, a common energetic compound used in terror attacks, and one that most amateurs chemists get in trouble with. It has to be handled with great care due to its instability. To minimize risk, I suited up in full protective gear, face shield, welding gloves, and a lab coat, and carefully moved the bottle behind a blast shield. The first thing I did was to inspect the bottle's lid, to see if there's any crystals on the lid that would be a clear sign that the bottle was unsafe to open. In my case, the lid was clear, so I proceeded with caution. Using a pipette, I carefully removed a small sample of the ether and added it to potassium iodide and acetic acid solution. This is a peroxide detecting solution. The resulting color change to yellow confirms the presence of a dangerous peroxide. At this point, I recognized that handling this bottle any further was beyond my comfort zone. The situation requires professional disposal, so I promptly handed it over to experts trained to deal with such hazardous materials. This also means I need a new solvent. We can now start our Triptycene synthesis by grabbing a 250 milliliter round bottom flask and dissolving 1.8 grams of anthracene into a mix of 20 milliliters of acetone and 20 milliliters of 1,2-dimethyloxyethane. We can also refer to this compound as glyme for short. We went with glyme because we had some issues with the bis-2-methoxyethyl ether. You could also use dichloromethane instead, but keep in mind the reaction will take longer since the boiling point is lower. A general rule of thumb in kinetics is that for every 10 degrees increase in temperature, the reaction rate will double. This behavior can be shown in the Arrhenius equation, written as K equals AE to the negative EA divided by RT. Here K is a rate constant, A is the pre-exponential factor, EA is the activation energy, and R is the gas constant, and T is the temperature in Kelvin. Essentially, as the temperature increases, more molecules have the energy to overcome the activation barrier, which accelerates the reaction. One way to look at this is through collision theory. Temperature is how we describe the speed of molecules in chemicals. If we have a higher temperature, the molecules are moving faster. Reactions can occur when molecules bump into each other, so more collisions lead to more reactions. In our example, we're comparing dichloromethane, which boils at 39.6 degrees Celsius, with glyme, which boils at 85 degrees Celsius. The temperature difference is 45.4 degrees Celsius. If we consider that every 10 degrees Celsius increase doubles the reaction rate, then the reaction of glyamine would be approximately 23 times faster. So when using dichloromethane, the reaction would take 23 times slower to complete compared to glyamine. This is why solvent choice and its boiling point is so critical in influencing reaction kinetics. Glyamine also stabilizes the produced intermediates and allows for cross-solubility for the reaction. Next, we add 2 milliliters of N-butyl nitrite to the solution. This is a generous excess compared to stoichiometric ratios. This is due to its instability. We want to add more in case it breaks down. Next, we sub the flask with a clay as an adapter, so we can attach both a reflux condenser and a dropping funnel. Next, we place the flask onto a steam bath to gently bring the mixture to a reflux. This steady heat, along with stirring, keeps things controlled and stops any local overheating. Into the dropping funnel, we mix 2 grams of anthralic acid in 15 milliliters of glyme. Over the next 50 minutes, we slowly add half of the anthralic acid solution dropwise. Taking it slowly controls the release of nitrogen oxides and ensures the reactants mix well. Let's break down what's happening here at the molecular level. When we add N-butyl nitrite and slowly mix in the anthralic acid solution with our anthracene, the chemicals start to transform. The N-butyl nitrite creates an environment that changes anthralic acid into an unstable intermediate form. This unstable form quickly breaks down, releasing nitrogen gas and carbon dioxide, turning into a highly reactive molecule called benzyne. What's interesting about benzyne is with 3 bonds in a ring, it creates a lot of stress that doesn't want to be there. At the same time, we already have anthracene in the flask, which is well suited to react because of its particular structure, having delocalized electrons. The reactive benzyne then rapidly combines with anthracene in a process known as a Diels-Alder reaction. Think of it as 2 dance partners coming together in a perfectly timed move. Part of the anthracene and benzyne join to form a new 6-membered ring. This new bond is a key building block in the Triptycene molecule. The whole process is carefully controlled by slowly adding anthralic acid and using extra N-butyl nitrite, ensuring that benzyne is generated right where it's needed and reacts immediately with anthracene. The gentle reflux, which is controlled heating, drives the reaction forward, and the slow addition helps prevent any unwanted side reactions. After that half addition, add another 2 milliliters of N-butyl nitrite through the condenser. Then continue adding the remaining anthralic acid solution dropwise over another 15 minutes. Once we have it all added, the flask is taken off the steam bath. I then remove the reaction solvent. Since some unreacted anthracene might still be lurking in the mix, we cool the solution down a bit and add 2 grams of malic anhydride. Then bring it back up to temp and let the mixture reflux for about 15 minutes. This step forms an anthracene malic anhydride adduct that essentially scavenges any leftover anthracene. Next, cool the dark solution to room temperature before carefully adding a solution made by dissolving 3 grams of potassium hydroxide in 30 milliliters of 1:1 methanol water mix. Reflux the basic mixture for another 10 minutes. Doing so neutralizes any residual acid and starts liberating the crude triptycene. After that, let the reaction cool down to room temperature once more, and then we filter out insoluble solids, which is our crude triptycene. We then give it a quick wash with small amounts of methanol water mix to help remove any impurities. Our sample was a bit discolored, so I recrystallized it using toluene. which after cooling yielded around 300 milligrams, about one-third of what we expected. Looking at the collected waste, there's a lot of solid material, most likely containing our missing product. Nevertheless, we did get a product. Now it's time for my favorite part, analytics. So how do we know that we made Triptycene? Let's take a look at it at the molecular level by using NMR. But first, let's start simple. One of the most common analysis one can do is melting point. This can tell you a few things, mainly purity and if it's the compound that you want. If it's the wrong compound, it'll melt at the wrong temperature. If it's impure, the melting range will be much wider compared to a pure substance. We take our sample and put some into a capillary tube, which will hold it as it melts. Next, we load our sample into a melting point apparatus. I set this one up to start at 230 degrees Celsius and go to 270 at a ramp of 10 degrees Celsius. Up sequence. And shortly it's hot enough to start. We hit the start button and allow it to ramp up till the sample melts. Once done, we get a report. The melting point range was 253.9 to 256.1, which matches what it should be. Triptycene has a reported melting range of 252 to 256. Now let's switch gears to move to a more advanced method, nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR for short. I took a bit of our sample and loaded it into an NMR tube and dissolved it in some deuterated chloroform. Then inserted the tube into an NMR machine and ran it. And we got some good data. Given the list of chemical shifts provided by the instrument, here's how we assign them and interpret them for our Triptycene molecule. First, let's start with aromatic protons. There's 10 distinct signals listed from 7.44 down to 6.89 parts per million. Triptycene's 12 aromatic protons often give a complex multiplet pattern spread roughly between 6.8 and 7.5 parts per million. In a perfectly symmetrical world, you might expect fewer than 10 distinct resonances. However, small symmetry breaks, overlapping multiplets, and coupling pattern commonly cause the appearance of more distinct peaks. Next, the bridgehead protons. The two protons on the sp3 bridgehead on carbon's position 9 and 10 typically appear at around 5.40 part per million. Putting melting point and NMR together, we have successfully synthesized Triptycene at a relatively high purity. This means we're on to our next project, and thanks for watching.